should you encounter any problems, should you have any questions at any point in time, please do use the chat function. You should either see that as a little chat bubble in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, or if you're on a different WebEx platform, you may see it towards the bottom middle of your screen if you kind of scroll your mouse over it. It will look like a little chat bubble. You can click on that, and that will allow you to send the panelists any questions that you have as we go through the session, as well as troubleshoot any problems that you might run into. Please note that we will be receiving questions throughout the session. We do have time dedicated for question and answer at the end of the event. But if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to send them, and then we can answer them once we get to the question and answer component. So today we'll have Catherine D'Andrea, Sherry Jones, and Mujahid Khan walk us through a number of different topics related to disseminating the work that you are doing to improve malnutrition quality of care at your facility. They'll talk about some of the activity or some insights related to reasons to share your work, types of work you may want to share. They'll offer some examples of different abstracts and projects that have been shared at conferences and via publications, some best practices, tips, and considerations, as well as some current dissemination opportunities that you may want to pursue should you be interested in sharing your findings and your research activities. And then finally, we'll have question and answer towards the end of the session for about the last 15 minutes. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine D'Andrea from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, who will be moderating the session with Sherry and Mujahid. Thank you for joining us, Catherine.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey. I am very happy today to have the privilege of interviewing two great speakers for this webinar, Sherry Jones and Mujahid Khan. Sherry Jones is Senior Improvement Specialist at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Presbyterian Shadyside, working in the Department of Patient Safety and Innovation. Prior to her Improvement Specialist position, Sherry was the Clinical Nutrition Manager for 13 years at the same hospital. In her current Senior Improvement Specialist role, Sherry works with a variety of departments throughout the hospital, assisting with and leading quality improvement projects. Sherry has been active in the dietetics profession by serving in various capacities at the district, state, and national levels. Most notably, Sherry has served as chair of the Academy's Nutrition Care Process Standardization Language Committee, chair of the Academy's Quality Management Committee, and chair of the Clinical Nutrition Management Dietetics Practice Group. In 2013, Sherry pursued the formation of a new subunit within the CNM-DPG called the Quality and Process Improvement Subunit, or QPI, and served as chair as the QPI subunit from 2013 through 2016. During her term as chair of the QPI subunit, Sherry initiated and developed the QPI Award Program, currently in its 5th year. The QPI Award Program accepts QI project submissions from RDN and NDTR Academy members, which then go through a rigorous judging process to select and recognize the top 10 projects. Sherry facilitated the judging committee and established the initial submission and judging criteria for the program. During her career as both an RDN and improvement specialist, Sherry has submitted numerous QI project abstracts to conferences, which subsequently were selected for either podium or poster presentations. Some of those selected were featured at FNC, IHI's National Forum, the National OR Manager Conference, and the Southwestern Organization of Nurse Leadership Conference, UPMC Nurses Week, and the Clinical Nutrition Management Symposium. Sherry is a strong proponent of sharing QI work with others by submitted abstracts to a variety of conferences and publications. On an annual basis, Sherry encourages her project stakeholders at UPMC Shadyside to support abstract submissions, and frequently it's Sherry who writes the abstracts for submission. She recently submitted project abstracts to the ANCC National Magnet Conference and the NAHQ National Conference, which are pending acceptance. Sherry also mentors others at UPMC Shadyside and has been asked by several nurses to review abstracts prior to submission. Our second panelist is Mujahid Khan. Mujahid Khan is Senior Manager of Quality Improvement at the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. He oversees the design and implementation of the Academy's quality initiatives, as well as the advancement of member engagement within the National Quality Strategy. Over the last few years, Mujahid has been supporting efforts of the malnutrition quality improvement and continues to do so. We are happy to have both speakers today to share their knowledge and expertise on this valuable topic of dissemination. We're going to kick it off. I'm going to ask the first question to Sherry. And Sherry, if you could please explain and give us why it is important for RDNs and NDTRs to participate in quality improvement initiatives, and why should they share and publish their work?
Great. Well, thank you, Catherine, for that introduction, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel. It's a great topic and something, as Catherine mentioned, is near and dear to my heart. I feel it's very important to share any type of QI work that is being done. And the key point, as you can see on the screen of the slides, QI projects are strongly encouraged to be submitted as abstracts, either for podium presentations or poster presentations. You don't have to only submit research work, so it doesn't have to be formal research. There's a bunch of reasons I have listed on the slide as to why it's important to share your work. I won't go through each and every one, but I will just highlight a couple key reasons. First and foremost is to advance nutrition and dietetic practice and promoting evidence-based practice, best practices in the profession. And this is important so others can learn from what you've done and learn from your successes. It also is a way to promote the great work that you're doing, the work of your team, to promote your organization, and a way to celebrate those successes with your team and with your organization. I recently had a project that I'll be highlighting that was selected for the IHI conference, and I was just at a committee meeting this morning talking about that work that was done and spoke to it and showed the group that it was presented on the national level. And it just makes the team and the frontline staff really excited about the work that was done, and it generates other ideas, and it just kind of becomes infectious with the team. They want to keep doing great things. Also, with regard to specifically the MQii initiative, it does increase awareness of the prevalence of malnutrition in hospitalized patients. And I found when I have presented any type of QI projects I've done at conferences, when people come up and talk and want to hear more about what you've done, they actually provide a lot of great ideas or other things to consider. So it's not only a way to share your work, but also to get ideas from others. And also some of the other bullet points on the slide, it really helps to support a culture of quality in healthcare in general, to support the National Academy of Medicine's 6 Aims for Improvement, as well as the National Quality Strategy. And to the last bullet point, many of you had to get stakeholder buy-in from your administrators or leaders in your facility to participate in the MQii work specifically. It shows that your leadership that this work is important on a larger scale when you do submit abstracts and present the great work that was done. So those are my thoughts, and just to promote UPMC, the facility where I work, I know Kelly Danis had a presentation at FENCI this past year on the MQii work that was done here at UPMC. So lots of great avenues to share work, and really a lot of reasons why you should not hesitate to disseminate the work that you're done.
Great. Thank you for sharing that why with us, Sherry. I think it would be helpful if we saw some examples of where Academy members are currently participating in quality improvement initiatives and sharing their work. And I believe, Mujahid, you brought some examples of that.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has been for the last several years now trying to engage its members and successfully so with the quality improvement different initiatives, as well as the national quality strategy like Sherry mentioned. And some of the different resources that the Academy has developed with its volunteer leaders, I will highlight for you now, include the quality strategies learning modules, which are learning modules to educate practitioners on current quality strategy trends. It's a 4-part series. The first set focuses on the overview of the national quality strategy, while the second set discusses its impact on RDN and DTR practitioners. Also, the development of a quality resource collection, which is a catalog of over 100 different resources classified by RDN professionals to develop quality improvement as a critical component of the nutrition and dietetics practice. It features an appendix for educators and preceptors. Also, the Academy's Quality Strategies Work Group shared examples of quality and process improvement projects, where a variety of abstracts support the efforts of RDNs to conduct quality improvement projects at their organizations and align with the National Quality Strategy. And then finally, the formation of the Quality Leader Alliance, which is a network of RDNs and DTRs who are experts in quality management activities. The Alliance members work to educate food and nutrition professionals on quality management concepts and resources. Something to note here is that the Quality Leader Alliance, the QLA, applications for this will be opening up at the end of March in the next month. So, if you're eager or interested to join, we encourage you to do so. And all of these resources can be found at www.eatrightpro.org/qualitystrategies. And to highlight some of the work that the Quality Leader Alliance has really been engaged in over the last couple years is really a new way for members of this group to really present their QI projects with one another. So the QLA members showcase their quality improvement work through a series of quality improvement virtual huddles, or quickeners as we like to call them. And these 30-minute quality improvement quickeners allow for QLA members to present their QI project and dialogue with each other. During the huddle, the QLA member will share their particular QI project, get feedback, and collaborate on new ideas amongst their peers. Some of the QI projects that have been presented thus far include cystic fibrosis, improving quality nutrition screening, improving nutritional screening in acute care hospital, establishing RDN baseline and continued confidence, implementation of malnutrition documentation in 2 academic medical centers, implementation of the RDN job ladder, and then finally the last one, which was presented just last month in January by Sherry Jones, was nursing best practice with bedside shift report. So thus far, the feedback from both the speakers and listeners has been very positive. Like Sherry mentioned, our speakers, when they present, feel empowered and feel a sense of recognition for the work that they've done at their facilities. And the listeners really value getting tips and best practices on how to, improve their quality improvement initiatives that they're doing at their sites. So it's really a win-win for our Academy members to be part of this network.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mujahid. It's exciting to see all the different areas where work Academy members are currently involved in. The next part I'd like to ask Sherry. Sherry, if you could give us a summary of what type of work can be submitted as abstracts and what needs to have been completed in order to prepare to share your work or write an abstract. Where do we start?
Great things to take into consideration. So on the next few slides, I actually broke it into 2 phases. And the key point here, we want to encourage people to submit anything. It doesn't have to be a whole comprehensive PDSA cycle and complete journey. So the slides you're looking at here are ideas for early phase type of QI to think about submitting as an abstract. So these are things that have been your milestones, perhaps, along the way on your entire QI journey, some of your initial small tests of change. So with regard to the MQii project, there's a readiness assessment that many of you probably took part in, where you identified what to target your initial QI efforts on. So think about that and what you started out doing, perhaps how you even engaged your stakeholders and got buy-in, working with your IT department to enhance your assessment documentation or preparing your electronic health record for the data extraction, anything along the way of best practices that you felt for in-servicing and educating the participants, whether it be the RDNs, the physicians, coders, nurses that are doing the malnutrition initial nutrition risk screening, validating the competency on nutrition-focused physical assessment, or examination rather, sorry. And, really implementing anything, any of the components along the way. But the key point here, you may not necessarily, with these early phase tests of change or components along the journey, you may not necessarily have pre and post data. But when you are submitting an abstract, you need to have some sort of results or outcome of what you did to show how you evaluated the impact of what you accomplished. So although I'm kind of saying here you don't necessarily have to have gone through the whole PDSA cycle with pre-post data, you, however, for these early phase stages, you have to show an outcome of something. So those are the early phase types of work to consider sharing. The next slide gets into the late phase, or things that would have your outcome measures, the end result of an entire PDSA cycle or your QI process. And this is where you would have data to show pre-post and compare to show the impact of your work. So in order to do this, you would have to have data collected, showing what type of quality measures you were using. It's really nice also in these late phase type project results to show also how you've been able to sustain the improvement over time, how you've supported the entire PDSA cycle. And there's just some examples I have listed here on the slide of different things that you may take into consideration that have shown your QI improvements, whether it be with regard to the nutrition screening, your RDN assessment and how they communicate malnutrition recognition to the physicians, the physician documentation, and last but not least, this is probably most important, the outcomes, patient outcomes. What have you been able to impact, whether it be increase in intake, weight gain, length of stay, or anything that relates to patient outcome indicators? It doesn't necessarily have to relate to the formal ECQMs. It could be any type of patient outcomes, whether it be pressure injury reduction, changes in diet orders so that patients are getting more appropriate diets that encourage them to eat. So just kind of showing that kind of the two-phase process, it can be early on type of QI along the way, or it could be showing and highlighting an entire PDSA cycle where you have pre-post data.
Thanks, Sherry. That was a great way to look at the early and the late phase and get that great explanation. Can you now walk us through an abstract? What are the typical components, and then any tips that you have for creating an abstract?
Sure. So the next slide shows kind of the nuts and bolts of an abstract, what the anatomy of an abstract is. If you are submitting to a conference specifically, they many times have directions on what exactly they are looking for. I have listed here on the left-hand side some of those elements or components that many of the guidelines will have. So what I have listed here, it can vary based upon the type of conference or publication that you're submitting for, but typically there is always a title, and usually they have a word limitation on the title. Sometimes they want to have a learning objective listed, so after, participating in this abstract or poster, what will the attendees have learned? They always want the authors listed, and they usually ask for who is the primary author or the primary contact person, and then all of the other contributing authors. And then with regard to the abstract, so the narrative itself, it typically follows this flow. And based upon the guidelines, they call these components different things. So from the variety of conferences that I've submitted abstracts to, I kind of listed out what the synonyms are of the components. So whether it be background, opportunity, or problem. So how was the QI problem identified? Your goal, aim, or purpose. And in some cases, they want you to write this in a very specific SMART goal format. What were the methods, strategies, or approach you took? So what was your improvement strategy? And then your results and outcomes, which is very important. They want to know the impact of what you did. And then in many cases, they also want a conclusion or impact to the profession or future considerations. And there have been a couple abstract submissions where they've also wanted references listed or literature support. So not all of the submissions want the literature, but you just need to kind of look and see what their guidelines are. And then on the right-hand side, just some other considerations. Many times they want to limit your narrative to either a word or character count. So you have to pay attention to that. So with having said that, you have to be concise. It's very difficult to meet those limitations of words or characters, but you have to be comprehensive. So I know it's kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth where you have to be concise but complete, but this is where the abstract really becomes your elevator or sales pitch. You have to, what you write and include in your abstract has to really be strong and use words and things that really garner the impact that this had. So it really needs to compel interest from the judges and also for the attendees or the reader of the abstract. So I have at the bottom of the screen here the rule of thumb, if you just want to back up, Catherine, with that narrative is kind of the 2-4-4-2 with the number of sentences to include in each component. So to meet the word limitation in many cases, 2 sentences on the background and the goal, 4 sentences on the methods and the strategy that you used, 4 sentences on the results and outcome, and then 2 sentences for the conclusion. So that's just a rule of thumb with regard to the narrative. This then that Catherine is showing on the next slide is an example of an abstract to show you the limitations in some cases. This was an abstract that I submitted to the IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement National Forum. And as you can see, they had very specific word limitations in each of the sections. So I just wanted you to see visually what an abstract will end up looking like when you are submitting your work and what some of the guidelines are for some of these venues. Just to continue on, some other tips and considerations. The next couple slides have some helpful hints. This slide that's showing is what you can do to really get attention and consideration for selection. So in many cases, you will be submitting these abstracts to conferences. Pay particular attention to the theme and or the objectives of the conference, and make sure that what you're submitting kind of fits that angle so that it's relevant to the conference objectives and it's also original. Take into consideration the audience or those that will be attending and make sure it appeals to them. So in many cases, I've kind of asked myself, would this topic be of interest and why should others really care? I've used also some of the theme or key words that they have in the objectives of the conference. I've actually used certain words in the title of my abstract. And making sure that it's kind of catchy when you're writing your titles. And just making sure also that the narrative, the abstract itself, the paragraphs, that you entice and catch the reader's attention from the first few sentences. And really, how can you make your abstract and your QI project stand out among others? Many times for some of these conferences, they get hundreds of abstracts. And sometimes it's multiple abstracts on the same type of topic. So not that I want to really say, but it can be competitive when you're submitting abstracts. So you have to keep that in mind and make sure that what you're submitting really stands out among some of the others. Making sure that things flow well and the progress of ideas is clear, and making sure that you connect the dots with everything, as I have listed here, that your methods are targeted to the problem and so on and so forth. But I really want to emphasize, don't be discouraged. I have submitted to many conferences and have not had my abstract selected. So if at first you don't succeed, try again. I've submitted to, one conference, it didn't get selected, then I submitted the same topic to another conference and it did. So don't get discouraged. It kind of takes practice when you're working on this, which leads to the
Sherry,
next.
Yes. Sorry. Just to add into that, you're absolutely correct of not getting discouraged, because here at the Academy, we have also submitted different projects and works that we've been doing in quality management at times and haven't always gotten a positive response, but more likely than not, eventually down the line, we do receive the positive response. So just keep at it.
Exactly. So some other key submission issues and suggestions, some tips that I've learned along the way. Many times submissions of abstracts are electronic. So what I've found, because of word limitations and just from an editing standpoint, I always type my abstract in a Word document format first, and then that allows me to do the word count and to share with other people to kind of take a look. I then, after I've finalized, I copy and paste into the electronic submission, keeping in mind what the word or character limitation is. As I mentioned prior, it's very difficult at times to stick to those limitations. I've gone back when I've done my word count or character count and just kind of taken out a lot of the filler words or jargon because it doesn't really add to the submission. Make sure that you define abbreviations or acronyms the first time, because many times those that are reading as judges may not understand. Follow directions, specifically if they give directions, make sure you are sticking to that. Sometimes abstracts can be disregarded right off the bat if you didn't clearly follow what their directions were. Starting early, knowing that in many cases there are deadline dates. I've given myself enough lead time and kind of done my initial draft. I go back several days later, read over it many times. It's also helpful to pull other people in, people that both understand the project for content, but then people that weren't involved in the project, or just completely objective people that are great at editing that can read for English structure. Sometimes, for certain conferences, you can go in and look at previous abstracts that were submitted in years past. Sometimes they will even share from the previous year abstracts that were submitted, which is really helpful. So kind of do your homework. proofreading, double check for typographical errors, spelling, grammar, punctuation, and in some of those instances where they're asking for references or they want literature to support, making sure that you're using more recent, within the past 5 years or so, literature. And then the next slide, just from my perspective, having been a judge of abstracts that specifically were submitted to the C&M DPG, the QPI project that I initiated several years ago. We got several abstracts that were submitted every year on QI projects, and these are some of the things that I would ask myself as a judge. First and foremost, did they follow directions? Was everything there, was it complete? Was it well written in terms of language, grammar? Does the title describe the project outlined? Many times it's the title that will bring the interest to the judges or those that are attending the conference to come and look at the poster. Are the methods and improvement strategies outlined? Did I understand what was the specific QI strategy that was used? What are the outcome and actual results? How were things measured? Were the results impactful? Do all the dots connect? And is it original work? Is it able to be replicated by others? But my first and foremost key to success is just paying attention to detail, following directions, and making sure you go back and proofread.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Those are great tips, great takeaways, and it was exciting to have you, and you have both perspectives from the writer and submitter of abstracts and the judging and creating the judging criteria. So those are great tips for everyone. I think it would be great next. I know you each brought some examples of some work that has been previously submitted and shared. So I know, Mujahid, you have some to share next.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the posters that we were able to, an abstract that we actually submitted to FNCE and turned into a poster because it was accepted was the Food and Nutrition Conference and Expo in 2017 here in Chicago, and we actually did it on the Learning Collaborative 2.0. And one thing to keep in mind is that this poster is one of those early phase abstracts that were submitted that Sherry was mentioning earlier. So we didn't have a whole lot of data in terms of the Learning Collaborative sites, but we did have results in terms of recruiting members to be part of the Learning Collaborative. And here, we were just, kicking off 2.0, and we've got about 50 hospitals to be part of the Learning Collaborative. And we show that in this poster, and it follows, the abstract followed one of those more of the traditional format where it had, a background, a methods, results, and conclusion. But one thing to also keep in mind is, like Sherry was mentioning, you have to be very concise, and we're restricted to a 250-word limit for submitting to FNCE. So we had to sometimes, tell the story in other ways, including, having graphics and charts and pictures to really show more of the information, and we did that here. The feedback was well received. The next example is of that of GSA, the Gerontological Society of America, presented in November of 2018 at their annual scientific meeting in Boston. And something to keep in mind here is that, again, this was where MQii was going into its next phase, or the new frontier, as we like to call it, really looking at advancing patient-centered malnutrition care transition. And so we had a dialogue that was convened. Basically, we had a systematic problem that was identified with gaps in malnutrition care as the patient moves from transition. And so we brought together a multi-stakeholder group, and we convened a dialogue, and we developed some best practices and ideas of a framework of how we can address those gaps. And so that's being presented here. Again, not a lot of data to report on, but definitely a story to tell as to what our next steps will be and how we plan to achieve those next steps. Again, one thing to keep in mind here is that, some of these graphics look very complex and they look real fancy, and so sometimes the onlooker might see it and be like, oh, this is not something I can do. But a lot of this stuff you can just come up with in a Word file format. You know, there's a lot of different programs out there online, including Canva, that you can use, and they're for free. And you just, you know, fill in information and it pulls up the graphics. So definitely something to, you know, it might look a little bit intimidating at first glance, but as you get the hang of it, you'll become an expert. The next example that we have is for the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, IHI, which was presented just this past year, December of 2018 in Orlando, Florida. And again, this is going back to the requirements that Sherry was mentioning to keep in mind when you're actually building your poster, if your abstract is accepted, is making sure, and I know IHI had specific requirements for width and height, which basically meant that you had to have a vertical form of the poster. And so this is a little bit more non-traditional, but it worked out very nicely. And even the way the abstract is displayed is a little bit different, where we have a problem statement, aim statement, an approach, and a conclusion. And so one thing to also keep in mind here is that you have to make sure that you follow the requirements for what's given, and make sure that you're hitting all the key points in your abstract.
Okay, great, thank you. I believe, Sherry, you also brought an example from IHI?
I did, Catherine. So this was the same conference. I was honored to have had one of my projects selected for the IHI conference in December. This is the same project that I showed earlier on, the narrative abstract example. This is afterwards, after it was selected, the visual of the poster itself. So just another example as what the previous slide showed that Mujahid was talking about with that vertical look to it. But you're able to add much more detail in the poster once selected than you're able to in the narrative abstract. So it's really, you know, no holds barred as far as the visual of what you're able to share. Obviously, you have to, you know, include the main components of, you know, the background, the objectives, what you did, and your outcomes and conclusion, but you're able to add a lot of graphics like Mujahid had mentioned. So I just wanted to kind of take that full circle and show you what the narrative looked like and then the outcome of the poster.
Great, thank you both for those examples. Many people may be wondering now, are there current opportunities to share quality improvement work and findings? And if so, where can they be found? So if you could each take us through some current opportunities. I think Sherry has some first.
Sure. So there is currently an opportunity to submit your QI project abstracts for FENCI of this year that will be held in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, the due date is Friday, so only a couple days away. Some people may already be aware of this and have started or already submitted abstracts, which is great. But also, they will reopen for late-breaking submissions during the month of May. And FENCI does this purposefully because some people may not have outcomes yet as early as February, but perhaps later in the spring there will be outcomes. So they will open up again for the late-breaking submissions. They select less abstracts during that time frame, but still an opportunity nonetheless. I'm not going to read, just for sake of time, all of the specifics. You guys will be getting copies of the PowerPoint, but there are specific guidelines for FENCI. You are expected to attend FENCI if your abstract is selected. And also, I put on the bottom of the slide, just be careful to note that FENCI has very specific guidelines that this has to be the first national or regional presentation of your piece of work. So if you've presented the same project elsewhere, you should not be submitting the FENCI. They want it to be the first time original work that you're submitting. So those are the FENCI guidelines. There's the link in the blue box of how to get in to submit for FENCI of this year. The other opportunity is the Clinical Nutrition Management QPI project program. They are currently asking for submissions for projects. They close out on March 1st. I have at the bottom of the slide the link to get into the CNM DPG website to submit your project. You do not have to be a member of the CNM DPG to submit your project, nor are you required to attend the symposium. So you just have, if you get selected and your project is one of the top 10, you just have to create a poster and mail it to the symposium. You don't have to show up in person, but we would strongly encourage you to show up in person. It's an awesome symposium. But here are the guidelines. The top winning poster, the number 1, will get free symposium registration to encourage you and allow you to attend that learning opportunity. And then Mujahid, I think you were going to talk about the next opportunity. That's quite exciting.
Yep. We have a very exciting opportunity up and coming for our MQii Learning Collaborative participants, and that's really the Journal of Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is coming out with a special JAN supplement in September of 2019 to be published this year, focused on MQii abstracts. And so this is a great opportunity for the MQii Learning Collaborative participants, really a benefit to them to be part of this collaborative. You know, you've worked many hours and you dedicated much time to getting this initiative set up at your facility. It's about time that you get, you know, you showcase your work that you've done and you tell your story amongst your colleagues and amongst the Academy members. And so this is a great way to showcase that. And like Sherry mentioned previously, you know, whether you're, you know, been part of the Learning Collaborative since 2016 and have a lot of data to share and can really showcase how, you know, you've improved quality improvement in your site, or, you know, you're just getting on board within the last couple months with MQii, you can talk about other aspects of building your multidisciplinary team, or getting your data fully integrated with the EHR system, or some other aspect of getting your leadership on board. So there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different lenses to present the same, maybe the MQii story. So we strongly recommend you to consider, you know, talking to your team to think about maybe submitting an abstract to the supplement. One date to keep in mind is the Friday, March 1st date, which is the second part to the dissemination webinar, which will really go through the details of the abstract guidelines. So very excited about this opportunity.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Definitely look for more information to come out very shortly about that March 1st webinar and plan on attending. It will be very detailed as to the requirements and how to submit for that JAN supplement.
There's also, Catherine, just to mention, there's many different other opportunities out there as well. We can't go into all of them in detail, I know, for the sake of time, but there are some of these non-traditional, sometimes when you're an RDN or NDTR, you might be thinking down a certain track of just clinical nutrition where you want to present your information. But like Sherry and I were mentioning, you know, there's a lot of different conferences out there, including IHI and National Association for Healthcare Quality, different journals as well to consider, like the Journal of Healthcare Quality. So these are a lot of different opportunities. You can just Google any one of these, and it'll tell you the specifics in terms of when the conference is occurring and the submission deadlines and guidelines, and follow through with that.
Great. Thank you. I think we'll just have our last slide here. Oh, Sherry, if you could share with us just this last slide once I get to it here, explain the tools and resources that are available from this webinar.
Sure. Well, as I understand, the PowerPoint will be shared with the attendees on the webinar, as well as a one-page handout, a tip sheet that took much of the content from the slides. and just put it on a one-page kind of easy reference. One of the things to note on that handout toward the bottom is if you are thinking of submitting any of your QI work, to please share what you're doing prior to submission with the MQii Avalier liaisons as well as the Academy. There are things that they can offer to you to help enhance your submission, so think about sharing that in advance. The slide that's currently showing, I don't know, Catherine and Mujahid, if you wanted to talk about this specifically.
Yeah, absolutely, Sherry, thanks. So one thing to keep in mind for our Learning Collaborative participants is that if you do plan to, present your work or, submit an abstract or poster or some kind of written article for a journal, we would appreciate if you could give us a heads up, preferably 30 days in advance. And others have done that in the past, and it's really helped because we've provided feedback and maybe some direction on what angle they can take with the work that they've developed. And we've also given them the high-resolution MQii logo for them to utilize in their materials and posters. The other thing we'd like to do is we'd like to share their work and put an announcement in the bi-monthly DISH newsletter that goes out to all the Learning Collaborative participants. And up at the top right, you can see someone who was able to present a poster, and we highlighted we gave a shout out to their work in the DISH. And so we'd like to just as a note, just let everyone know if we encourage you to do so, and if you do so, just let us know that you are.
And then quickly, as I was mentioning, there will be a tip sheet and a copy of the slides. I also want to make people aware that since it is open for submissions for FNCE right now, if you log into the FNCE site and kind of scroll down, all the guidelines and specifics are in there, but there's a section called Tips from the Experts Webinars. And there are 2 webinars that were pre-taped that you can watch, and I highlighted the very first one that I listened to that webinar. It's an hour long, and they give tips that are very specific to FNCE and how to get your abstract successfully selected for FNCE. So I would highly recommend, if you have the time, to go ahead into the FNCE site for abstracts and view that video. It was quite helpful and informative.
Great, thank you, and thank you to both of our speakers. We have about just 10 minutes left to do Q&A now, but I think we've heard a lot of great information, so we're going to open it up to questions. And just a reminder, if you do have a question, to type it into the chat box.
Great, thank you so much to Sherry and Mujahid and Catherine. This is Kelsey. I again want to reiterate, we are very excited about all of these dissemination opportunities, and especially the opportunity to feature the work of the Learning Collaborative members in that JAN supplement. I think it's going to be a great opportunity. There's opportunities to submit articles. There's opportunities to submit brief abstracts. The MQii team, the Academy, and Avalier are here to kind of support and work with you, and we do hope you'll join us on March 1st for more details on that opportunity. If you have any questions in the meantime, please reach out. We have received a number of questions via the chat function. Again, please send to us any questions that you do have via the chat function, and we'll pose them to the speakers. And the first one we received, it says, I seem to be hindered in creating quality professional visuals in a presentation. I feel very limited in creating anything beyond the bullet points. What are some tools and resources I can use to help shape data or tell a story using compelling visuals?
I can take that, and then Mujahid has additional ideas. I think Mujahid mentioned with regard to the posters that there are a lot of tools out there online. Something that you can think of, if you go into PowerPoint, there are a lot of tools in there to do different types of visuals with regard to timelines, process flow diagrams. The IHI, Institute for Healthcare Improvement, has additional tools from a QI perspective where they have examples of fishbone diagrams, and all kind of different things that you can utilize. I also just, as Mujahid, Google different things, and you can look at the different images, and there are sometimes some templates that are free that you can utilize. And then what I end up doing is I create those either in a Word document or PowerPoint or whatever it may be, and then I snip it and copy and paste it into the poster. So there's a lot of resources out there that you can utilize for those visuals. Also taking pictures. Taking pictures of your team or different, celebrations or whatever it may be. I've put a lot of actual pictures on posters, which is a nice visual.
Yeah, I think those are great pointers there, Sherry. I think the one thing I just again mention is that there are free softwares online where you can create a lot of different designs now. One of them is Canva, CANVA, and you just create a login account, and you're able to create a lot of different graphics, a lot of high resolution graphics. So that's one place to start as well.
Thank you both. We had a similar related question related to the software that Mujahid had recommended for presenting abstract information. You said Word and then another software product. Can you remind us what that other software product was?
One was the Canva. I think the other one I mentioned was just a Word document. You're able to, a lot of times the different graphics and charts on that are sometimes enough to tell a story or to create some kind of a timeline. So that's doable as well. And I think what Sherry mentioned is great too, to just Google it.
Thank you. Another question we received says, you talked about early phase results and said you have to show an outcome of something. I think this was in the portion, Sherry, where you were talking about kind of some of the early engagement, building a multidisciplinary team, et cetera. So the question is, could you give an example of what some of those intermediate but not necessarily data-driven outcomes may be?
Sure. So I think one of the things I talked about was the strategy used to get stakeholder buy-in. So perhaps, how along the way, like who you reached out to, and as a result, you could show your outcomes being copies, or what an email approval was, or how many administrators said, yes, we are on board with this. Also with screening. So if you're looking at your nutrition risk screening, did you look at improvements in the screening? How many nurses were in-serviced about the new screening criteria? If you're doing, nutrition-focused physical exam, how many dietitians participated in that? You can do satisfaction surveys. So anyone, with your stakeholders or nurses or staff, you can just get some qualitative comments from them as to how they felt things went. So those are kind of examples of outcome results that you can use or talk about in your abstract that aren't necessarily pre-post data comparison.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question we received says, I'm relatively new to the submission process. Do you have a recommendation of the conferences that you mentioned, which ones might be the best to target for an initial submission?
Well, I think. Oh, go ahead, Mujahid. Well,
I was gonna. Go ahead.
First and foremost, target those that relate to our profession. So FENCI or the CNM. But I've found a lot of success in some of the interdisciplinary conferences. I've submitted to IHI a couple times and got mine selected both times. And it's really cool when you see other disciplines. There are physicians, pharmacists, nurses, all kind of positions that attend the IHI conference. So I've found a lot of success and learnings from going to that conference in particular. But, FNCI, by far would be, a great conference for a first-time submitter to submit your work. I didn't know if you had anything to add, Mujahid.
Yeah, those great points, Sherry. I think just to add to that, I guess first and foremost, I would recommend the JAN supplement. The more details are coming in the coming weeks, but that's certainly a big market for the MQii Learning Collaborative participants to really think about considering submitting some kind of abstract. But like you said, even some of the non-traditional avenues that we don't think, submitting to might be good places for abstract committees to, when they actually review the abstract, to consider bringing your abstract for acceptance, because it's not the traditional route that information usually gets disseminated at. So, for instance, giving the nutrition information at an IHI, but some aspect of the work that you've done relates back to healthcare quality improvement. So just some ideas.
Wonderful, thanks. And I would just add one quick comment to that. I think also for some of these opportunities, there may be opportunities or ways to kind of link it to some of the broader policy trends and things that we're seeing as in the healthcare environment is more focused on things related to transitions of care and care coordination and social determinants of health and things that really underlie the health and wellness of a person. I think nutrition fits very, very squarely within that space. So as you're thinking about kind of ways to connect it to broader trends or looking at the buckets of abstract topics that different conferences or journals may be looking for research on, that may help you think about how to target your abstract as well, just kind of thinking about how it fits within some of those larger topics that different organizations are seeking to highlight. So I want to thank Sherry, Mujahid, and Catherine again for joining us today. If you all have any follow-up questions that we did not get to during the Q&A portion, please feel free to send an email to malnutritionequality@avalier.com or to myself, Kelsey Jones, or Mujahid or Catherine, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found this informative, and please do register for the March 1st webinar. That will be a second dissemination-focused webinar. We'll get into a lot of really good details about that GN supplement opportunity, what an abstract submission looks like for it, some of the requirements and recommendations for submitting to it. I think that's an exciting way to showcase the work that you've done as part of the Learning Collaborative. So really encourage you to join that webinar, and we'll be sending out some follow-up materials from this session shortly, including copies of the slides, the CPEU information, a brief handout that Sherry mentioned, kind of with a snapshot of the information shared today, as well as additional information on the March 1st webinar. So please be on the lookout for that in your inboxes. Thank you again for joining us today. Have a good day, everyone.